I've always known that regardless of your situation, there are always, probably thousands, if not millions of people that would trade with you in a nanosecond. So not living a life of gratitude seems just like a horrible way to go through life.
Welcome to Decision Point, a podcast about mental toughness and overcoming adversity in sales. I'm Brad Seaman. As we were developing the roadmap for the first season of the show, I'll admit, gratitude wasn't something that jumped to the forefront of my mind as a key component of mental toughness. But I recently was reading a couple of books titled Standing O and Standing O Encore, which are collections of essays from athletes, CEOs, and entrepreneurs sharing their lessons that they've learned from influential people in their lives. The stories are curated by author Scott MacGregor, who is the founder and CEO of Something New, a staffing and recruiting company that is providing a new approach to sourcing talent. I reached out to Scott because I wanted to understand how living a life of gratitude has helped him overcome adversity in life and in sales. My conversation with Scott really changed my perspective on the power of gratitude, and not just gratitude for good things, but also having gratitude for hard things that shape us and make us stronger. Let's listen in as Scott shares his story. I've got Scott MacGregor here. I'm excited to have Scott on. Scott is an author of Standing O and Standing O Encore, short biographical stories on the gratitude of life lessons. He's the founder of Something New, which has a unique spin on talent acquisition and talent search and placement. And his team has been the 3-time consecutive award winner of the American Business Award for innovation, and they have 5 of those total. He's also heavily involved in the Look for Good Foundation. And he's got another book that we may talk about here in the future, but that's Scott's background. He's also got a 20-plus year sales and sales leadership experience in software technology and print. And so, Scott, I'm glad to have you on.
Brad, I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to it.
Scott, tell me about the book. Tell me about Standing O. Tell me about the process that was going on when you decided to write it. And tell me about why you wrote the book.
So I'll take a step back from there. So when I started Something New a little over 5 years ago, probably the most important thing, other than disrupting an industry that I thought was fairly dysfunctional, was to create a company that was founded on giving back and to really make that the DNA of the company. So the company's name is Something New, but our mission driven piece of our business is called Something Good. So through Something Good, we do a whole bunch of different things to give back. The books are probably the most prominent. So I've been incredibly blessed throughout my life to have an incredible network of just amazing people. And I thought one of the ways that I could share some of the things that I get to learn from them on a regular basis was to put some books together and then give all the proceeds to charity. So we started with 52 authors. Dick Vermeil wrote the foreword, Tiki Barber wrote the cover quote, and then the book is filled with 52 Olympians and military leaders and athletes and CEOs. It's all about gratitude for life lessons learned. We were successful giving, I think, 2 organizations, Elevate New York and Keep On Playing, awareness that they needed and also funding through the sales of the books. And then we repeated that process again with Standing O Encore.
Awesome. So you mentioned something a couple sentences back about when you started Something for Good, really wanted to have a principle of giving back. What made that important to you? Why was giving back something that was on your mind?
It's just always been incredibly important to me. And I think I've witnessed, unfortunately, too many companies either just pay lip service to it or do things because, it looks good on a website or it just didn't seem to be a core part of most companies' DNA. But I did see some incredible examples of companies that really were built on a model of giving back, and I thought that we could do the same. So it was important to me. It's just not. I'm not looking to necessarily put additional zeros in my bank account or buy a bigger house or a newer car or anything like that. I think if you're going to leave a legacy, that's not a legacy. The legacy is really, what you do for other people.
Well, since you said that, I'm going to ask you a question, sort of out of turn here on my questions. How would you define success?
I think success is making other people better, giving other people opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have had without you. To me, that's success. It's probably why I've always gravitated towards a leadership position. Leadership roles are sometimes a thankless job because you may get paid less than your star sales rep. You have more responsibility, you have less control of your outcome, but the attraction for me was always being able to see somebody accomplish something for the first time, whether it was making six figures or putting a kid through the school of their choice or whatever it was that they were able to accomplish, and knowing that you were a part of that. So that's always been something that was very attractive to me.
Well, I know in the interview that I watched, I think he did it with Kevin Singleton, and when he talked about his standing O moment, he got a big smile on his face. Like you could tell that you recounting the story that he told about his dad was really impactful. And it
Yep.
seems like, and I would assume that you really offered probably a refreshing, some refreshment to these guys as it pertained to recounting some of these stories that have made them who they are.
Yeah, I think it's just a really neat, unique, permanent way to give recognition to somebody that impacted your life. Not everybody winds up in a book. For the first book, Standing O, we actually had one of the contributing authors had written her Standing O to one of her teachers. She didn't tell her. She's in Atlanta, and she didn't tell her anything about it. She just said, "We're going to take a trip to New York." And that trip was actually for our book launch party. And then she filmed handing her the book in their hotel room, and the teacher saw that Catherine had written about her and just broke into tears. So it was pretty special to see those types of reactions from the people that were written about.
Yeah, it's awesome it was neat to read the stories and to see the importance of relationships and how they change the trajectory of someone's life. I guess before we get any farther, the idea of gratitude, is that something that you felt like you grew up with, or what happened or occurred that got you thinking about or maybe sensitive to that topic?
I think I'm just a glass half full kind of a person. I grew up very poor in a affluent town, which was a very strange way to grow up. And I think regardless of the obstacles that I've faced in my life, which I've run into a couple doozies, um, I've always known that regardless of your situation, there are always, probably thousands, if not millions of people that would trade with you in a nanosecond. So, not living a life of gratitude seems just like a horrible way to go through life. So I'm blessed. I'm blessed in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think as I read the book and as I mentioned earlier, I think gratitude sort of creates a sensitivity for you to really understand the things that are happening around you. And you
Yep.
mentioned that you've had, and one of the reasons why I felt like this podcast was a good topic is sales, life, they're full of adversity. And those who find success and improvement really have figured out how to embrace that.
Yep.
And though the idea of gratitude, when I think about adversity and mental toughness, I probably wouldn't write that down as one of the top characteristics or features of somebody who's mentally tough is gratitude. But you did change my perspective on that. What do you think about the idea of gratitude and mental toughness? Do those two things go together?
They do. I think, first blush they don't, but they really do because I think it's all how you look at the world. And being a former sales leader, I was a VP of sales and marketing for a long, long time. And one of the things that I always look for and that we look for and try to teach our clients today is really looking for people that have resiliency. It's people that heal quickly, and today being the day of the NFL draft, they always say that a good cornerback is somebody who forgets that they may have gotten burned on the play before. So you've got to have a very short memory. And in sales, I think you've got to. I would say in life, it's not just sales. You've got to heal very, very quickly. And I think oftentimes it takes people days or weeks or months, and you hear this people, maybe talking about a setback that they had in life, and you realize, wow, that was, obviously something that was pretty significant, but, hey, that divorce was 10 years ago, and
Right.
yet it's still impacting them today. I just think, you know, I'm the type of person. I turn the page very quickly.
Quickly. Yeah.
Even during these times that we're in right now, this is just a moment in time.
Yeah. That really leans into there was a quote that we read or I read kind of prior to coming up with this idea, which was from Barbara Corcoran. And she said the difference between successful salespeople and others is how long they spend feeling sorry for themselves. And as I read, looked into some of her content, listened to some of her keynotes and podcasts, she really leans into that concept of being able to move on. And she changed my perspective a little bit on hard work, which I think is a cornerstone to hiring a salesperson. Her perspective was, and I think it is skill and will. I think there's a combination here. So I don't think she was trying to downplay this, but she did say that she felt like she had salespeople that had been successful that hadn't worked as hard. And then she'd had salespeople that were very hardworking, but hadn't had the same success. And in her mind, the hardworking, underperforming rep, she felt like she could typically tie that to not being able to move past the no. So they're doing the phone calls, they're sending the emails, but they're really sort of, hedging and medicating their failure or their attachment to the failure with all the activities.
Agreed. Yeah. So there's three primary things that I've always looked for. And this is, again, something that we work with our current clients on. And I think these are the cornerstones for successful people: and their work ethic, discipline, and resiliency. I have rarely seen anyone that has a great work ethic, that has tremendous discipline, and that is very resilient. I've almost never seen somebody like that fail. Um, so those to me are the cornerstones. I think the mistake that oftentimes people make is they consider those things table stakes, and they consider those things to be things that people have uh, in abundance, and that's just simply not true. You can look around our country, whether it's the problems that we have with obesity or the problems that we have with debt, and you can see very clearly that we don't exactly live in a very disciplined society. So people with discipline and work ethic and resiliency are very rare, and I think when you find them, you hire them.
What have you found? Um, Maybe not a tactics, maybe not a good word, but what have you found to sort of uncover that in the interviewing process? How do you figure out if somebody is there a trick or an insight to sort of figuring out if somebody has those three disciplines?
Yeah, I mean, we use behavioral interviewing techniques, which is really, having people explain times when they've used certain things, and those have played a role in their success. So it tends to make them be very specific and give specific examples. So I think you're always looking to the past to predict the future to a degree, and oftentimes it's easy to find those patterns. Work ethic and discipline and resiliency really don't wax and wane that much. It's not like one year you have it, the next year you don't. Those are things that are kind of core to somebody's DNA. And those are definitely predictors of success.
All right. Well, let's transition. You've got the 20-year background in sales. How hard is sales?
It's very hard. It's a little like baseball. Most people, most baseball players bat somewhere in the, 200 range, 250, 260, 270, meaning you're failing, 75% of the time. And I think most salespeople, that's the case. So it's tough. You're getting punched in the mouth all the time, and you're dealing with rejection and difficult circumstances. And I think that's why work ethic, discipline, and resiliency are so important. It's a very tough profession, but done right, I think it's the best one out there. I've loved my career in sales and really wouldn't trade it for anything.
Now, do you think you've highlighted resiliency a couple times? Do you think that goes hand in hand with mental toughness and adversity?
100%. Yeah, I mean, if you can't bounce back, you're finished. Whether it's, you can look at, I am accused often, rightfully so, of either making a sports or a military reference, and I think you can kind of look at people that are successful in athletic endeavors or people that are successful in the military, and a common denominator is they all are resilient. They have to be. They won't survive otherwise.
Now, do you think how much of we've talked a little bit about skill, we talked about the mental game. When you think about a sales role, how much of that is skill and how much of it is mental?
A lot of it is mental. I mean, there's definitely you've got to be willing and able to do the job. So able to do the job is, do you have the faculties, the IQ and the EQ to do the job? The answer to that is typically yes. And then you've got to be willing to do the job, which is you've got to be willing to do the hard stuff that no one really wants to do. And over and over again, throughout my career, I've seen people that, given the map to success, try to take detours or try to take shortcuts, um, and it just doesn't work.
Right. You got to put in the elbow grease. Do you kind of honing in on gratitude and circling back as you talked about this a little bit. eh, how does gratitude fit into the sales role or the perspective or perception of the sales role? Because you're getting rejection a lot, inevitably in the position, and they seem to not go together. But how does that apply to a sales role? I should just, should I be happy when I hear a no?
I mean, you should be, because every no, this sounds cliche, but it's true. Every no gets you closer to the yes. So those aren't defeats, and I think it's all how you look at it. If you see a no as a defeat, I think you're just looking at it the wrong way. That's really a step forward closer to being successful.
One of the things that in what I've read and in interaction with you, and then what I have seen in videos, there seems to be I think you've got some natural poise, but you also have resiliency and determination, as long with stick to itedness, really to be able to stick to something. You had a long career as a VP of sales, a very long career as it pertains to VPs, and do you think that came from your upbringing, or do you feel like some of that was naturally handed to you?
It definitely came from the way I grew up. I think that kind of shaped me. It made me pretty psychotically motivated from the get-go. I just didn't want to live the life that I saw my parents struggling through, and it wasn't really for material things. It was, just every Christmas, every birthday, knowing that my parents maybe couldn't afford to buy me presents, but were going to anyway. And that was you know, that's really not a very enjoyable way to celebrate something that everyone else is celebrating. Because it's a hardship. So I never wanted to live like that, and that made me very, very motivated. Um, I was a competitive athlete. Then I had a fairly severe back injury that derailed uh, my sports, and I channeled that then into school and did well, and then got out immediately, started working, um, and was successful not because I was smarter than anybody, but I did the work. I just day in and day out, and that's probably been one of the reasons why I've had a fair amount of success in my career. Is it just every single day, I put in the work.
Next thing we're going to do is what I call the power play. So I'm going to hit you with a couple questions, and you just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Um, Toughest decision you've ever had to make?
Uh, Professional, I'll leave it professionally. Probably letting certain people go, firing people, but really understanding that it was a fiduciary responsibility to the organization as a whole. But those are always gut wrenching decisions.
Yeah, for sure. What about biggest regret?
Not starting the company that I have now. I sat on a business plan that I had written for a decade, and I just didn't have the guts to jump off the cliff and do it. And finally, I did, but it took me 10 years.
Well, I'm totally derailing the power play here by asking you follow up questions to what's supposed to be rapid fire. But what was that process like? What initiated you? You came up with the business plan at some point in the business, and then what initiated the transition? At what point did you decide, hey, I got to just draw a line here and make the jump?
I was very dissatisfied where I was. I mean, I was making a lot of money, and that was really what was keeping me there. I just couldn't kind of wrap my head around leaving that amount of money. But I was very disappointed with the direction that the company was moving in, and my wife was incredibly supportive. So Meg had, continued to encourage me to follow my passion and to basically jump off the cliff and give it a shot. And so I give her all the credit for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely helpful if you got some support on the home front. Next question: Are you born mentally tough or made mentally tough?
I think you're made mentally tough. When adversity comes your way, it either crushes you or you move through it. I see, you know, sometimes people hit minor adversity and they're essentially in the fetal position, and other times I see people get hit in the sledgehammer, hit in the head with a sledgehammer, and they move on as if nothing happened.
Yeah. Anything else you want to cover? You want to talk a little bit about the new book coming up?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Why not? This is the first time I've spoken about this publicly. We're not going to actually announce it until July 4th, but we are coming out with our third book called Standing O Salute. It is 100% military, so everybody in the book is somebody who has served in the military, and we've got a lot of generals and a lot of Army Rangers and Navy SEALs and Marines and just amazing people, Medal of Honor winners that are in the book, and all the proceeds are going to go to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, which is a phenomenal organization run by Clay Hutmacher and Sean Cargan, just fantastic people. So we're really excited about it, and that'll be out in the fall.
During our conversation, Scott mentioned 3 traits that he believes are the key to success: work ethic, discipline, and resiliency. That last one really stuck out to me in terms of how we think about adversity and overcoming adversity in sales. I'm going to bring our producer, Kyle Hawk, on here. Kyle, what stuck out to you?
Well, yeah, I think, you talked about that last point, resiliency. Scott shared an analogy of how, a baseball player, will go up to the plate, and if he's able to get a hit 1 out of every 4 times he goes up, that is considered successful. But that also means that you're failing 3 out of 4 times. So it seems like, well, how could you call that success, right? But I think when you tie it back to like what it's like to be a salesperson, and Brad, you're a sales guy. I mean, a lot of it is failure. It's failing to get the sale and learning about like, okay, how am I actually going to work through that and get past that and use those failures to become a better salesperson? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that he highlighted that. He gave a strategy for learning from your failure and moving forward with confidence.
Yeah, no question. And that's I think it's a hard skill to learn. I mean, you kind of have to, the only way to do it is to like repeatedly go through failures. And I mean, the further you can get from wallowing in those failures, but actually saying like, okay, that didn't work. What am I going to take away from it that's going to be useful for me as I kind of approach my next obstacle? That's really the only way to kind of develop a knack for overcoming those problems and challenges that we face.
Yeah, Wyatt asked him in the interview, I said, is sales hard or easy? And he said it's hard. And then he went on to give that analogy. And I think the thing that he sort of pointed out was you really have to be, he said something along the lines, and this is a common sales, perspective. I said, well, should you just be happy because you got a no? And he sort of, I think he chuckled and transitioned by saying, yeah, because a no gets you closer to yes. I do think you really have to be fixated on getting a yes or getting to yes as being really important. Otherwise, you do see that as a failure. So
Yeah.
if you're not getting, if you're not fixated on getting to yes and getting satisfaction over yes and really having a glass, I would sort of a glass half full mentality, then you are going to be really discouraged. And I think that's a significant point to bring up as it pertains to people who find success in sales and those who don't, is their perspective of missing out on, not being effective 75% of the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to get your take. To that point, you kind of started the conversation with Scott talking about gratitude. He wrote, those 2 books, Standing O. It's obviously something that he's really passionate about. What were your thoughts and what he shared in terms of like how gratitude relates to mental toughness?
Yeah, so I was really interested to have him on because I wanted to talk about that topic, and I'm really fascinated um, about people who, I would say there's a gratitude movement. I mean, there's a movement of people. It's a recent movement of really putting a lot of emphasis on gratitude. And what I think is interesting about that is, and I may have stated it in the podcast, that I think gratitude is the one thing that allows you to be to understand the present. And if you're going to move
Mm.
into the future, you really have to be in the present. And then I'm sure we'll get into this when we talk about Brandon, or when we get into our next episode and we start to digest Brandon's comments. But he made a really good he made a really good point, which was you can't get something. He essentially said something around the lines of, you can't get what's coming to you if you're not grateful for what you have. And that
Yeah.
reminded me of, hey, if you have a Pinto car and you want a Mercedes, you're probably not going to get the Mercedes until you take good care of your Pinto.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. And you're referencing that interview with Brandon Steiner. I'll say at the start of all this, I would have been surprised that we were going to have two episodes here that kind of had a focus on gratitude. But to hear Scott, and later on everyone will hear Brandon as well. It really does make a lot of sense, and how gratitude can be pretty impactful in terms of growing in mental toughness.
Well, and I think the other thing that it does is it grounds you from panic. So if you're grateful for where you're at and what you have, you're not going to panic. And we all know that panic in sales is awful. I mean, as soon as you
Yeah.
throw out the panic signals, you start deeply discounting, you start getting urgent, you start throwing out kind of emotional signs that you're in distress. I mean, you might as well just set the deal on fire, because those never go well. I
Yeah.
mean, the client can pick up on it. You start folding like a lawn chair. It just doesn't go well.
Yeah, no question.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Remember, if you'd like some further reading on how to grow in mental toughness and become a better salesperson, you can download our mental toughness playbook. You can get it for free by going to monsterconnect.com/podcast. And remember, subscribe to your favorite podcast app and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, don't let what you cannot do interfere with what you can do.